Given the number of seniors that they'll be supporting as the kids grow up, and given what it was today and what it was before, kids born in 2015 are literally twice as important to California's future as kids born before 1985. Well, you know, the old story is that demographic change is threatening us, and many people still feel that. There's just too many children. Children are a burden on the taxpayers, and we really can't afford other people's kids. But let's look at that more closely. What about these old assumptions? What if I told you today we actually have too few children, not enough children? You need 2.1 babies per woman just to break even. That's the replacement level demographers talk about. And we're tracking well below that, more like 1.8. Even though our population has grown by more than 30% in total, the number of children is fewer than before. And that's remarkable how it was skyrocketing, and we thought it was going to go through the ceiling, but it stopped dead in 1990 and turned downward and has never gotten back to that level. Well, the fact that we have too few children being born isn't a crisis in itself. The problem is we have way too many older people, and we have to balance the two together. I like to look at it at population growth by age group and how much each age has grown or decreased over the 20 years' time. Before 2010, the 20 years before that, there was this huge increase in middle-aged people who are the baby boomers. And they really were driving the economy. They're in the prime earning years, top tax-paying years, and there weren't very many young people behind that. In fact, there was even negative growth among people in their 20s, and not much growth at all among elderly. The next 20 years, everything changes. Now, it's not a surprise. You just got to do the arithmetic. Basically, everybody got 20 years older, and so the growth wave now moves from middle age into elderly years, and you have an explosion in seniors of all ages. Meanwhile, back where there was growth before in middle age, it goes to zero in some ages. And it's just not much growth among the working age population to counterbalance all those retirees that are up there. You know, a really handy way to summarize the older population relative to the working age is to use a senior ratio. And that ratio is pretty constant for 40 years, from 1970 all the way to 2010. And then the first baby boomers turned 65 starting in 2011. And after that, the senior ratio skyrockets. It literally doubles. All our governmental services, all our expectations are attuned to the old ratio, and the new one we haven't seen before ever. The growing imbalance between the older generation and the working age generation, it just has lots of ripple effects and consequences that are already starting to be felt. Greater burdens on Medicare and Social Security, which older people deserve and are going to demand as voters. And one last thing is it probably means that higher taxes are unavoidable if we're going to sustain our economy in the face of this aging population. You might wonder, what about immigration? Isn't immigration a way to fortify the workforce? Can we bring in more immigrants, and could they save our bacon? It's clear that it would be a benefit if we had enough immigrants, but immigration is also slowing down in California. So immigration does not matter as much as people think. Either way, it's not as extreme on the plus side or the negative side. But really, in people's minds, it's a very big deal, because immigration in California took off dramatically after 1970. By 1990, it had really just skyrocketed to the point where people were extrapolating up through the ceiling at the rate pretty soon we'd all be foreign born at this rate. And of course, that was unrealistic. And in fact, it's reversed itself and slowed down. And the total foreign born, instead of going higher, has leveled off at 27% in California, pretty constant. And we think it's projected to be constant for the next 2 decades as well. It's just not growing anymore. But the myth lives on, that we're inundated by rising immigration when there's just no evidence of that in California. California was always the land of the gold rush. People came from other states and other nations around the world, and people weren't really born in California. But we passed a milestone about 10 years ago where for the first time the majority of California residents were born in California. So it's more important now than ever before to make sure that the young people of California receive the education that we need for our workforce, because we're not getting workers from outside. They're not coming from other countries, they're not coming from other states. It's really a homegrown workforce that we're facing for the next decade. So just how important are these kids really? I've done some calculations of my own to try to figure it out. Given the number of seniors that they'll be supporting as the kids grow up, and given what it was today and what it was before, my calculations show that kids born after 1985 are becoming more and more important, and the ones born in 2015 are literally twice as important to California's future as kids born before 1985. And the biggest upside potential is with the children who've been most neglected in the past. The ones that really haven't had as much investment granted to them, they're more disadvantaged. That's where the upside potential is. It's our job to help bring them along. We need to cultivate their talents so every kid is at their top capacity. That's the only way we're going to make this work. Then it's better for the kids and their families, it's better for us and our families, it's better for the whole California population. We all benefit by investing in the youngest. And the earlier we start, the more payoff we get. Well, the question at hand is, how well are we preparing our kids for their big job? You know, we pride ourselves in being national leaders in California, but let's look at how we're actually keeping up with our investments in education. You know, if you actually look and see, well, how much spending is there per pupil in California, you compare all the other states, well, California's spending is about 14% below the national average, despite our median household income, which is 15% higher than the average. It seems like we have capacity to do more if we thought it was urgent. It's no surprise that children don't pay a lot of taxes. The money is coming from middle-aged people. They're the big earners, and they have the most taxes they pay. Their money is going to different people. It's going to younger people, who will then replace them later on as the big tax contributors when they get to be middle-aged as well. Everybody rotates roles over time. In 20 years' time, everybody changes positions. The kids grow up, become the young workers become the middle-aged workers get their retirement. Well, there's an opposite view about who's spending and who's contributing. It's a Peter Pan theory, is what I call it. And that basically assumes that people don't ever grow up, that you put the money into kids and it stays with the kids and the kids stay as kids. They never become middle-aged, they never become prime earners and taxpayers. And the middle-aged people never get their benefits as seniors. They stay as middle-aged workers their whole lives. But in reality, we know that everybody does advance 20 years. They all move up in the cycle of life. And no one's Peter Pan. We take turns. It should be obvious, but successful workers begin as well-educated kids. And that doesn't start in 12th grade. And it doesn't start in 8th grade. It doesn't start in 2nd grade. It starts earlier even than that. 3- and 4-year-old kids really are the foundation for a well-educated workforce. And the earlier we invest, the more benefits we can accumulate in those children and the stronger workers they're going to be. We're pretty darn sure they're going to grow up. And that 3-year-old is going to turn into a 23-year-old in 20 years' time. And then they're going to be really on the threshold of a career that is going to be vitally important as we have more retirees going out the retirement door. We need to fill them with strong California workers. This is our opportunity. I mean, this is the chance to really make the future better for all parties, for the kids themselves, of course, but from my standpoint, also for the older people, the boomers. So now's our chance to really make it happen by investing today in those kids. With the programs that they need to get started, we need to give it to them so they can really buff up and carry the big load of hoisting all of us.